He took off out of Huntsville yesterday, and he flew to Dallas and got hung up in Dallas. And then he had to catch another flight out of the way to Salt Lake City, and he missed his flight there and got messed up there, so he had to get on the wagon train and come our way. Now, he rented a car and made it our way, and he finally got here at 1:30. Started early yesterday morning and finally got here at 1:30, and we're so glad that he did. I've been talking with Michael Houts now for at least a couple of years. Never met him, but we've been talking through text and phone calls, and he's just a person who just loves being able to be a servant. But let me tell you some things about him. Dr. Michael Houts has a PhD in nuclear engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and currently serves as a nuclear research manager for NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Prior to joining NASA, Dr. Houts worked 11 years with Los Alamos National Laboratory, serving in various positions, including team leader for the Criticality, Reactor, and Radiation Physics, and deputy group leader of the 70-person Nuclear Design and Risk Analysis Group. Professional awards include a NASA Distinguished Service Medal, a NASA Exceptional Service Medal, a NASA Exceptional Engineering Achievement Medal. Dr. Houts grew up outside the church and was a staunch evolutionist through his early 20s. Dr. Houts and his wife were baptized into the Lord's Church in 1999, have 2 children. Dr. Houts also serves as an auxiliary staff writer of science writer for Apologetics Press. And I just read you just a little bit of what I've read about him. I Googled him some years ago, and he's one of those guys, when you just put Dr. Michael Houts, he just pops up everywhere, and all kinds of stuff is written about him. But anyway, we are fortunate and should consider ourselves blessed to have a man of such caliber come and talk to you about why science is a Christian's friend. Dr. Houts.
Hey, well, thank you, Richard. I'd like to, again, thank you for, it's been a pleasure interacting with you over the last several months and years. I really want to thank the elders here at the congregation and the congregation as a whole for organizing this event, for attending this event. I do have to say it's really, really, really hard to follow Eric and Jeff. I mean, they are really good speakers, and it might be especially true because I kind of work full-time as an engineer, and yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard, but you know how you tell if an engineer is an introvert or an extrovert? Okay, the extrovert will look at your shoes while he's talking. Okay? So with that said, we're gonna go ahead and get through this. All right. Okay, so true science is the Christian's friend. And so I like to couch it that way because it's not, science is something we should embrace. I mean, God created the universe. God encourages us to study the universe, and it really is a friend. In other words, what I mean by that, the more we get into science, as true science advances, the more it confirms the Bible. In other words, the more it's consistent with the Bible. And so it's not only something we shouldn't be afraid of or something that we should be nervous about. It's actually something that we can really use to evangelize. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about a little bit tonight. Some of the reasons, Ephesians 4:14 through 15. As a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ. And so again, Eric alluded to a lot, Jeff did. Unfortunately, I missed Dave's talk, as was noted in the introduction, but couldn't get you on the plane. I tried. But anyway, there's a lot of craftiness and deceitful scheming out there, or trickery, or people saying things like, nothing caused the Big Bang, but saying it with, I don't know if it's the right attitude or the right accent or something, that people actually fall for that kind of stuff. And so again, something we need to be aware of. But the other thing that's very important, and again, appreciated Eric saying that not all atheists are hateful. We need to make sure that we do just like the Bible says. We speak the truth in love. And so when we're talking about this, because the goal is not to win the argument, and it's to encourage the person to obey the gospel, and so that person can spend eternity with God. And so that's our ultimate goal. And so we need to look at everything the Bible tells us to do, or how we are told to do it, if we want to do our best in again encouraging that person. Mark 12, 29 through 31, Jesus answered, "The foremost is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." And so on this one, if we focus in on loving our neighbor as ourselves, again, just think of it that way. When we're talking to somebody, however, if we're studying with them, we're encouraging them, whatever we're doing, that's how we're showing them love. And again, the best way we can love anybody is to help them spend eternity with God. And so just really, I'll say that repeatedly, but that's something we should really let sink in, is we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so even if a lot of people aren't instantly receptive, a lot of people, I'll talk maybe some on Sunday, I was certainly not at all receptive when people first started preaching the gospel to me. But again, we need to, we just need to be loving our neighbors as ourselves, and this is how we do that. So, is atheism scientific? And so I just want to start out, and these are just statements. They're firm, but they're accurate. The idea that the universe and everything in it simply made itself goes against everything we know from true science, and that's something we could go. You can spend hours and hours and hours, and again, previous speakers done a fantastic job, just kind of scratching the surface on that. And so this idea that somehow science is against Christianity or the friend of the atheist, that's completely flipped. And again, true science is the Christian's friend, enemy of the atheist. God has given us tremendous evidence that we should put our faith in Him, but it is our choice. Of course, Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. But it is our choice. And so what I'll do is I'm going to go through and just try to present some material that's directly useful. And that's, again, another reason I love listening to Eric and Jeff and Dave, is there's always like, hey, I could use that, or, this is a good thing. So I'm going to try to do that. And so the first one is, it's our choice. Well, that right there, one way to phrase that is, the fact that we can choose tells us how we should choose. And what I mean by that is, again, it's not a false dichotomy. In other words, it really is a choice. Either we are just chemicals, we are just each several thousand trillion atoms chemically reacting. Anyone that went to the restaurant tonight, you have a few trillion more. But the whole point is, we would just be this chemical reaction. And so, and chemical reactions can't make choices. The only way we can make even a simple choice is if we have a soul, and only God can give us a soul. Now, this isn't a lot of times it's, you have something that's, just really obvious, reasons we should put our faith in God. Well, this one's actually airtight. And what I mean by that is literally, if I just chose to do this with the remote, if that was truly a choice, then that proves I'm more than just a collection of several thousand trillion atoms. And so the reason I have that nice family sitting in front of a campfire on the screen there, it's not to be relaxing. It's not, eye candy or whatever they call that. It's literally, I want you to focus in on the piece of wood, okay? So that wood burning in that fire is actually a very complicated chemical reaction. If we take our best laboratory equipment, in other words, we can measure the texture of the wood, the composition of the wood, we look at the temperature of the wood, put in our best computational fluid dynamic programs, we can't predict how that piece of wood is going to burn on the fire. This is a very sophisticated chemical reaction. But the question is, can the wood choose where it's going to burn? Yeah, of course not. I mean, it's kind of silly. You can think, well, maybe it's, I think it'll burn over here. No, it'd be silly to think that. If God had not given us a soul, we would be exactly the same way. We would be this very sophisticated chemical reaction. We could not make even a simple choice. And so if we this is, again, it's kind of like, how do we get a person to kind of soften up, loosen up, maybe objectively consider the Bible? This one's actually, you can, if you can somehow get the conversation going this direction, it actually at least gets people thinking. Because most people realize that, hey, they can't make choices. They can, and that proves they're more than just a chemical reaction. Now, the reason I say this one's possibly, I don't want to say airtight, but is, if you say this to someone, well, if they're a committed atheist, and they'll be like, well, the atheist must have an answer to this. They don't. They say exactly the same thing, and that was some of the quotes Eric was showing towards the end of his talk. This was a workshop that was held about 9 years ago called Moving Naturalism Forward. This is a representative quote from Francis Crick. He says, you, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Who you are is nothing but a pack of neurons. So a few things I want you to notice that. First of all, he says your sense of free will. And so one of the things they'll say is, again, they acknowledge, since they don't believe we have a soul, they say we don't have free will. But sometimes they'll go as far as saying, well, they have deterministic free will, which means we think we have free will. In other words, it'd be just like if the log burning in the fire thinks it's choosing to burn a certain place, okay? And so, but that goes back to, the kind of the deceitfulness, and the trickery and the craftiness. Because if someone goes out on the site and all they read is just a couple of words, say, oh no, I saw the word free will, it said atheists think we have deterministic free will, and they move on, well then they've kind of, they've sort of stopped that person from really thinking critically, from really thinking it through. And so that's one of them, is that sense of free will. But the other one is, Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA, really famous scientist. Is that a scientific quote? Yeah, it has nothing to do with science. So another thing we need to drive home is there are a lot of atheists with scientific credentials that speak as atheists when they're quoted. And so I've never figured out a concise way of phrasing that, but just think of it as, a scientist being a true scientist, that's one thing. But a lot of times you'll get, I don't know how to phrase it, it's just you'll have atheists. No one can deny that they have 7 PhDs or whatever, tremendous scientific credentials, but when they make quotes like that, they're just speaking as an atheist. That's not a scientific quote, and you'll see that a lot. You see that on all kinds of topics, and we might have a few more examples coming up. And then this was just talking about, they had some more details on this workshop. They have, like one of the conclusions, if things are purely deterministic, the fact that we're all here tonight and we're doing exactly what we're doing, well, that was all predetermined back at the Big Bang, because it's all been just chemistry and physics since then, and so so that was one conclusion. That's when it's on the determinism. Another one, every now and then you'll hear, well, what about quantum mechanics? Okay, so again, we talk about big words, deceptiveness, craftiness. So whenever someone just throws out quantum mechanics, that usually means they're just trying to make it sound technical. And so, but quantum mechanics, one thing you think about, well, it's kind of random. Okay, so say I don't have free will, and it's just my chemicals reacting, but I go in and I rob a bank. Okay, well then I get in front of the judge, and my defense is going to be, well, yeah, I robbed the bank, but it had to be a quantum fluctuation because I've never done that before. What are the odds of that happening again? And so again, this whole thing is really absurd in a hurry. But that's where some of this will lead. And so, and then it goes on. Just some more quotes. It's I think the only thing that's so funny about this one is they're concluding that they're afraid to let us know we don't have free will, because that could undermine society. Well, first of all, if we don't have free will, then they really can't tell us anything. It's just whatever the temperature in the room happens to be, or what we had for dinner, or, so it doesn't. But then the second one is you do get a little bit of that arrogance creeping in. Like they're up here, they can deal with the fact that they can't think freely or have free will, but we're down here, we really couldn't deal with that. But so kind of strange. But the only thing I mention that is it's a good topic, and if the person chooses to look into it and they go on the internet, they'll find out that atheists admit it, but they're very careful how they phrase things. Another point that we can make to people is to stay focused on eternity. Matthew 16:26, for what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? But if you're just talking to somebody and you're trying to explain to them, well, why are we spending time talking about this? Why are we, the longest life on earth, well, right now, 100 years is considered pretty long. I don't know about you guys. If I read in the newspaper someone lived to be 100 years, I can't help myself. I always think, wow, that's a really long life. That's a long physical life. Methuselah, 969 years. Even longer. Both are zero compared to infinity. So both are zero compared to eternity. So it really is the most important topic for us to be talking about. And so when we're making these choices, the next logical step is we need to be making choices that will affect our eternity, because those are the really important choices. Whatever affects our eternity. And without sounding callous, everything that only affects our lives on earth is zero compared to something that affects our eternity. Let's see, another, probably hit the wrong button. I think Eric touched on this, and I like this one too, because you do get this question a lot. If God made the heavens and the earth, who made God? And so a lot of ways to think about that, but we get this, you'll hear that a lot from children. One of the things, talking to some people at dinner about is I think we underestimate our children. And so if a child asks a question, take it really seriously. Try to figure out why, because a lot of times, even very young children, 5, 6 years old, they'll remember the answer. And so take it, really try to, okay, what, why were they asking how? I mean, of course it depends on the child, but it's, and that's again just because it's even at that age, they're getting hit by stuff on TV, on the internet, at school. Unfortunately, even some of their teachers, and so there might be a lot more behind that question. Well, this is a question you get asked a lot. If God made the universe, who made God? But it's everything from, I'd say small children, but you'll have adults ask, and this is a very sincere question. First verse of the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so not only did God create the heavens and the earth, in the beginning means God also created time. So for God to create time, he must be outside of time. And so by definition, anything outside the dimension of time cannot have a beginning or an end. Because the words beginning, end, before, after, they don't make any sense outside the dimension of time. I always, and I like this one because, we go back to free will. Someone will say, well, if God knows everything, how does he give us free will? Okay, and so as a scientist, first thing you do is, okay, I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to figure that out. Okay, that doesn't work. But the point is, okay, I don't know what it's like in eternity either. And so that to me, it calibrates me as far as there are going to be things about God. I know, God has told us everything we need to know, but I realize there are things about God that I'll never, as a human, really fully understand, really be able to understand. And so, but this one, makes total sense. Again, God created time. That means he had to be outside of time. And by definition, anything outside the dimension of time can't have a beginning or an end. So just another way to express it. I know Eric again did a really good job talking about that also. But that's, again, it's just a question that, you get asked. But it's one that there's a pretty straightforward answer to, pretty reasonable answer to. Another question we can ask people, okay, so those are kind of, people say, well, those are sort of scientific, but if you start getting into the science, that's when you can really start making a person, I don't want to say think, again, you're trying to get them to just objectively consider the Bible. And so a lot of times a person, you'll hear it, they'll say, well, I've chosen to put my faith in science, or I believe science instead of the Bible, or you get those, and that's why we get this feeling. We hear that enough, and you start to think, just it kind of sinks in. We get this impression that, oh, okay, there must be this conflict between science and the Bible. So you start thinking about, okay, what questions could we ask in, kind of in return? What could we ask back? Well, this is a question. Another way to phrase it is, was life created by God, or did life spontaneously create itself? But if we want to just go straight to a question, well, we could ask somebody, say, well, is it scientific to believe that something happens spontaneously, and this would be life arising from non-life, that we've been unable to duplicate given our best laboratories, our smartest scientists, and virtually unlimited financial resources? And so what I mean by that, God has given us the intelligence and the creativity to make cars and airplanes and space shuttles and computers. God allows us to do that. We have never come close to making life from non-living material. And so it's even worse than, it's even worse than saying a space shuttle could make itself. In other words, because I could say, well, a space shuttle made itself, or we can make space shuttles, that proves space shuttles must make themselves. But you think, oh, that's kind of absurd. It is interesting, that's the argument we'll hear. If someone answers this question, they'll say, well, yeah, we can't make life yet, but someday we'll make life. What do you think about what they just said? They said, maybe, in their mind, well, if we spend trillions of dollars, smartest PhDs, best labs, and we were able to do something, that proves it happened randomly. Okay, so you see where we're going with this? I'll give you the punchline. I've never had a person say this is scientific. Because if they think about it this way, that's an accurate way of phrasing it. I'm not trying to trick anybody with the phraseology. That's an accurate way of phrasing the question. Never once have had a person say it's scientific. I've had a lot of people say, well, it's not scientific, but it's still what I believe. And you start thinking, well, initially you'd think, well, that's kind of as a dead end. I was trying to make headway with that person. I didn't really do anything. Well, actually, that's huge headway, because what they just admitted was they have a belief system that people have been telling them was scientific based. Telling them, and they just admitted that one of the fundamental, just almost foundational to that belief system, this idea that life could just make itself. They just admitted that that's not scientific. And so a lot of ways we can think about it. You can get into, we'll talk a little bit about some small amount of biochemistry, but not really. Just talk a little bit about it. But even just getting a person at this level, because it's not, it just should click. Again, we can, what God allows us to make, we can't make even simple life from non-living chemicals. If life could just make itself, I had a person ask me, it's probably about a month ago, and it was really funny. They had, I think Jeff was talking about this. They had he had this bone chip, and clearly this bone chip and this level of the fossil record shows that it evolved into this, and literally they were like bone chips. Evolved into this bone chip and this level, and what more do you need to prove evolution? And you're like, and so I just said, well, not saying it would prove evolution, but what we really need is just just take, 5, 10 chemicals, pour them out on a table, and have life pop out in a few minutes. You get people thinking, But that's again, best labs, hundreds of billions of dollars, really smart people. We can't make it. So it's a good point to show. Now, again, atheists have always known this, and so this was Ernst Haeckel. And when I say ignorance is the friend of the atheist, and this I'm using it as the strict definition of ignorance, which means we just didn't know or we don't know. And so what Ernst Haeckel did is he wrote this book, History of Creation. It was a very obvious kind of his alternative to the book of Genesis. And obviously one of the things he needed to do is explain, well, how could life just make itself? Where could life come from? That's really fundamental. So he says, during late years we have become acquainted with Monera organisms, which are in fact not composed of any organs at all, but consist entirely of shapeless, simple, homogeneous matter. And then, of course, at the end he says, simpler or more imperfect organisms we cannot possibly conceive. Okay, so think what he just said. He said, hey, I found simple life. I found this life that's so simple it can just make itself. And also, and he might just be a good writer, so I don't want to say, but these are words that, they kind of draw you in. During late years, we have become acquainted. It's like, wow. That's he did a lot better in English than I ever did. But it's like, and so, but that's the, but that's kind of the, it goes on and he talks about Monera that he's found, or at least he thought he had found. Talks about other people that have found Monera. But it's interesting, this book was published in 1876. Well, even in 1875, apparently people had figured out that it was just nothing more than amorphous gypsum precipitated out of seawater by alcohol. Okay? So it's kind of like if you take chemistry class, and it's kind of fun, you can mix certain chemicals together, and if stuff's precipitating out, it kind of looks like it's wiggling. So that's all he'd found. But they kept teaching us for like 50 years. That we know about this really simple life, But again, the idea that it could just make itself. And so, but of course now that's, to my knowledge, it's no longer taught. And again, the more we learn about life, the more incredibly complex we know that it is. Now, another one that you'll hear is that, well, what if you have a lot of time? And I've had people say, well, no one really knows how long 20 billion years is. And you're saying, well, it's 6.3 times 10 to the 23rd microseconds. That usually ends the conversation. But the whole point is, time really doesn't help. There's this kind of this misconception that, well, maybe given enough time, evolution will work. We'll talk in a few slides. It doesn't help at all for many reasons. But this was back in 1860. And kind of a famous atheist, Thomas Huxley, he proposed that given 6 monkeys, 6 typewriters, and unlimited time, the monkeys would eventually type all the books in the British Library. Okay, so again, oh man, that's an eloquent. It just paints this picture, and it kind of gets people's attention. But apply some true science, or in this case, apply some true math to it, and say, okay, in the real world, does that really matter? So what we can do is we can just imagine a really simple typewriter. No uppercase or lowercase, no punctuation marks, no space bar, just 26 letters. Okay, and the idea of the monkeys and the typewriter is just they're just going to randomly hit keys. Okay, so you think about, okay, at 26 letters, only have 26 options. Well, what are the odds of hitting a W? Well, it's 1 in 26, right? 26 letters. Yeah. Well, if you were going to hit a W followed by an E, then it's 1 in 26 times 1 in 26. Now you're at 1 in 676. Okay, if you hit a W followed by an E, followed by an A, followed by an R, followed by an E, then it's 1 in 26, 1 in 26, 1 in 26, 1 in 26, 1 in 26. Now you're at 1 in 11,881,376. Okay, so you're, so that's we are. Okay, now we are a bunch of monkeys. Okay, now we have to switch to scientific notation, which basically just whenever you see that 10 to the 28, that's zeros, after the number there. So to type we are a bunch of monkeys, now you're at basically 1 in about 2 followed by 28 zeros. Okay, so we are a bunch of monkeys, and I've never been to the British Library, but that's probably not going to happen at those odds. We are a bunch of monkeys trying to type something that makes sense that's not working yet, but maybe given infinite time. Now you're at 1 in like 7 followed by 135 zeros. So you can see that it sounded really eloquent. It sounded like this really fancy statement. But you see, it totally doesn't work. I mean, again, 20 billion years, 6.3 times 10 to the 23rd microseconds. The number of atoms in the universe, pretty much everybody agrees it's less than 10 to the 80th. Those are small exponents, just compared even to that 135th. So time doesn't help in this case. Now, and that's just what it looks like written out, so not too. Okay, so you have a lot of other scientific reasons, technical reasons we could get into if you wanted to, but we'll keep moving for tonight. But just at any level we want to look at, to me, the life from non-life, that's just hey, we can't do it. So is it really scientific to teach happiness fact? That's probably enough. But if they want to get into DNA, RNA, proteins, milieu experience, it all comes down on the side of Christianity. And so whatever level we want. But this goes back to one of the original points. This is a quote from Fred Hoyle. So Fred Hoyle, he named the Big Bang. Okay, so he's a famous British astronomer, and he named the Big Bang. And so a really smart guy. And again, I think Eric mentioned this also, but this was his quote. He says, "The likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 knots after it, is enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. There was no primeval soup neither on this planet nor on any other, and if the beginnings of life are not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence." Okay, so if you're out door knocking and you get on the subject with somebody and they say this back to you, I mean, you're like, wow. It's like he's basically, you think he at least, or I would think that he's talking about God and Bible study or what's the best way to, but that's not what he meant at all. What he said, purposeful intelligence, he wrote 3 books on an idea that he called directed panspermia. Okay, has anybody heard of directed panspermia? Okay, right, it's big words, so it must be technical, it must be correct. But the point is, that's basically aliens. Okay, and so that's why I was, but if if he wrote 3 books saying, hey, aliens put us here on Earth, no one's going to buy him. But directed panspermia, hey, that's good. And so the whole point is that he knew evolution couldn't work. Just from science, he knows evolution can't work. For whatever reason, I don't think anybody ever understood why. He did not want to put his faith in God. And so he came up with this third idea that he knew really didn't answer the fundamental question. Because if aliens put us here, who made the aliens? Who made the aliens that made the aliens? And who made the aliens that made the aliens? And so so again, keeping the big picture in mind. When we're talking to someone, just look for opportunities. Try to figure out, why are they resistant to God's word? Why are they resistant to the Bible? Now, we might have. Let's see. I have that puzzled. I thought there were more slides. Look, so no, that's fine. Okay, so what I want to talk about then, just really quick, is the idea of. Let's see. Okay. Okay, well, what I want to do then is elaborate again on some of the examples that are given about evolution. Okay, and so when we talk about things like peppered moths, it's one one way to look at it is exactly that. Those moths, you never had. They always stayed moths. Okay, so the idea of the peppered moth story was that you had two types of moths. Kind of like two shades of moths. Some were light, some were dark. And before the Industrial Revolution, the trees around England, that's why they call them the English peppered moths, had a very light-colored moth, or very light-colored bark on those trees. Okay, so you can picture, well, what do you think is going to happen? Well, the light-colored version of the moth is going to be camouflaged, right? And so birds aren't going to see it, but the dark-colored moths, they're going to stick out against that tree bark, okay? And the birds will see those and they'll eat those. And so that was the population density. Okay, and so you had 98% of the moths were light colored, only about 2% were dark colored. Industrial Revolution, this is how the story goes. Again, I think it was mentioned, that a lot of the story was possibly fabricated, but it makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, the way they define evolution. Industrial Revolution comes around, the bark turns dark. Okay, so now what's going to happen? Well, the dark colored moths are better camouflaged against the bark, and the light ones aren't, so the light ones get eaten, and the population density flipped. And so that is touted in these textbooks as proof of evolution. So the point I want to make on this is evolution requires additional genetic information. In other words, it requires like all the genetic information it would take to turn a bacteria into a person. DNA is what God uses to code for our physical characteristics. So for evolution to work, it'd have to use like mutations and natural selection to somehow to create all this information. Well, we don't see that. Peppered moths, the genetic information for the light-colored moths, the dark-colored moths was always there, okay? So no new genetic information. So flagship example of evolution, nothing to do with evolution. So that's, Darwin's finches, the beak shapes change based on the seeds that are able to eat. But all those changes, the genetic information for the different beak sizes is always there. So nothing to do with evolution. Bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Say I get infected by a certain bacteria and I take an antibiotic and that antibiotic kills 999 out of 1,000 bacteria that's infecting me. Well, that's a great antibiotic. But if that one bacteria that it doesn't kill recolonizes my body, now I'm infected with an antibiotic-resistant strain of bacteria. But nothing to do with evolution, because the information to resist the antibiotic was always in the genome, okay? Sometimes with bacterial resistance to antibiotics, you'll have like these designer antibiotics now where that antibiotic, it basically mimics a nutrient that the bacteria will ingest. Well, what if that bacteria has an information-losing mutation that makes it so it can no longer ingest that nutrient? Okay, well now it's an antibiotic-resistant bacteria that gained that resistance by losing genetic information. So that is the opposite of evolution. When we do new breeds of dogs and cats, when we breed, like the example, Chihuahuas, the way we breed Chihuahuas, we don't develop new genetic information to make the Chihuahua. We get rid of all the genetic information that is not Chihuahua. And I have no idea what committee decided what a Chihuahua was, but yeah, but that's basically what we're doing. Any information that's not Chihuahua, you get rid of. Okay, so that is the opposite of evolution. You're losing genetic information. Okay, so literally no example in any textbook, in any museum, in any magazine or on the internet of evolution has anything to do with evolution. And a lot of what our children are sold as, here's change, here's evolution, it's actually the opposite of evolution. Okay, is that sort of clear to anybody? Yeah, I had a nodding back there. He might not have been talking to me, but I do appreciate that. So okay, so that's the, so that's kind of, so a couple ways we can look at that. I'll give two examples, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. First example is, say this was an investment seminar. Okay, and so investment seminar, of course, my job as the speaker is to get you to give me all your money, and then I say that I'm going to make you all of us rich. Okay, so I come up here and I say, okay, here's my strategy. What we're going to do is we're going to make machines And every time we sell a machine, we're going to lose $1, but don't worry, we're going to make it up in volume. Okay, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I hope you don't. Yeah, you're not going to give me your money. Well, that's microevolution. You lose the dollar, right? In other words, every time when you have mutations in natural selection, or you develop a new breed of dogs or cats, you're losing information. That's microevolution. When we see this change, at best it's neutral. A lot of times you're losing information. Macroevolution, when we're trying to turn a bacteria into a worm into a person, you have to gain information. So if you lose a little bit of information at a time, over many years, you go extinct. You don't have macroevolution. And so this, again, is getting into a little more detail, but if you get someone, if someone's really struggling with that, you can literally say that. No example of evolution, because evolution requires new genetic information to be created. So that'd be the financial one. The other one, cars and money, and that might just be an Alabama thing, but you can also use a car analogy. Okay, so what we'd want everybody to do is just picture the perfect automobile, okay? So, because everybody's going to have a different one. So imagine what the perfect automobile would look like. Write a manual for making that perfect automobile, but before you make any cars, make 1,000 copies of the manual. Okay, so you have 1,000 separate copies of this manual to make the perfect car, and then change 100 words in each manual. Okay, so you change 100 words in each, and different words in each manual, you just randomly changed them. Okay, so what you basically did is you had the perfect manual, but then you mutated it. Okay, so you had 100 mutations added to it. And then go ahead and make 1,500 cars. Okay, so what are your cars going to look like? Are they going to be perfect? Yeah, not quite. They had 100 words changed. Well, some of them maybe they have those giant rear view mirror or something, and you're like, well, okay, I guess I can drive down the road. So you can live with that. But what if the other one doesn't have a transmission? Okay, well, you can't live with that. So you made 1,500 cars. You basically get rid of the 500 that you just can't deal with. You keep the 1,000 that are the best, and then so that's your natural selection. Okay, so you had mutations in natural selection. Then repeat the process. So of the manuals you use to make the 1,000 cars, we'll change another 100 words in each of those manuals. Okay, so now you've changed 200 words. You make 1,500 cars. Get rid of the 500 you don't like, keep the 1,000 you like the most, so mutations, natural selection. Do that 100 times, each manual will have had 10,000 words changed in it. Okay, so the question is, how long is it going to take your car to turn into a jet airplane? Okay? Yeah, you're not going that way. Okay, so anyway you look at it, so this whole idea that mutations and natural selection somehow turn one kind of animal into another, or create genetic information, maybe be more technical way for it. It just doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work. So just a quick, just quick review. Again, just the fact that we can choose tells us how we should choose. We need to stay focused on eternity because God inhabits, basically created the dimension of time. He can't, by definition, can't have a beginning or an end. And I should mention that Big Bang always appeals to the supernatural for how it starts, and so we'll talk about that more tomorrow morning. And then we know that life, quote-unquote simple life, is vastly more complicated than anything people have ever made. And just an easy proof of that is, we can make cars and space shuttles and airplanes and computers. We can't make life from non-living material. And then we know this idea that mutations and natural selection could somehow drive evolution or cause one kind of animal to turn another. Just our observations and some common sense examples show that doesn't work. And I should also mention there's papers being written now that are saying that humans are losing 1 to 5% fitness every generation. And so that's as expected. We're only maybe 200, probably 230, 250 generations since Adam and Eve. That's kind of expected. But how society reacts to that is going to be strongly influenced by whether we have a spiritual focus or a physical focus. And so that's another topic that'd be really important to talk about at some point. And so, again, that was just a real quick, well, from my standpoint, quick presentation. But again, just always like to leave with, one thing just for all of us to keep in mind, just always think of, okay, say someone is receptive and they do want to study the Bible. Well, where do we go with that? One thing that's really unique about the church is people can ask us questions, spiritual questions, biblical questions, and we don't have to say, well, I think this, or our preacher thinks that. The best answer is always, it doesn't matter what I think. Let's see what the Bible says. And then let them read for themselves. And so I always like Romans 1:16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. And also like to just give examples of people being saved, because we can give verses, and those are really good also, but sometimes it's good just to keep in mind, just because all of those, I always catch myself when I say, oh, that's a really good Bible verse. I mean, all the verses are good. But just those examples can be very useful depending on the Bible study. So again, I want to thank you for your attendance. Thank Richard for organizing. Thank the elders here in the congregation. It's been a great week so far.